really well because Scott and I were able, we have a good friendship, a very good friendship, and we were able to really connect as people, as leaders, connect with one another. And I think that was very apparent to the respective congregations we serve. We were able to really talk turkey about some of the realities of the church in America and some of the realities about racism in America. The country has a very sordid history, but there's nothing wrong with America that can't be fixed by what's right with America. And I am so grateful to have been in partnership and to remain in partnership with someone who shares that sentiment. We have been very deliberate, again, in bringing people together, even in the midst of a pandemic where we've been limited to doing a lot of things virtually and only a few things in person. But things began on a very, very high note, and they remained higher. They climbed, they ascended even higher because of the personal relationship that Scott and I have, and then Amanda too. So I'm so grateful to have been in a space where we can be candid, we could talk openly, we could read and really dissect things and talk from a very personal perspective on how those things relate to the individual, how those things relate to the denomination, how those things relate to our racial communities. That level of candor is so important. So I guess that's the initial framing that I want to begin with. Scott, I'll defer to you.
Yeah, I would say that, from my point of view, that's exactly how it happened. I was lucky enough to participate with the Duke Divinity School Doctor of Ministry program for a number of years, and got to know Dr. J and the wonderful person that he is, and his openness and willingness to talk to this old white guy. If there's a poster child for white privilege, it would be this Nordic old white-haired man who's in a congregation that is in a denomination that's 97% white, that struggles with that identity. We're a congregation that's creeping up at closer to 10% African American and other minorities, and so we as a congregation have always worked toward that. Some years ago, I started what felt like some of this work together with Donna Banks when we did Micah groups together, and had a number, a dozen or so of us that came together to talk about what is this thing called reconciliation? How do we live together, acknowledging the differences and the things that we have in common as well, and how do we live together and draw together, but honestly talk about those things that are important. For me, it also grew out of the fact that one of the Emmanuel Nine, Clemente Pinckney, the pastor at Mother Emanuel, was a classmate of mine at Southern Seminary, the Lutheran Seminary, and two of the nine were indeed students that had been at the seminary. Clemente was a couple of years behind me in seminary, but we shared a couple of, well, I guess it was 3 classes together. And so, and of course, the roof fella who perpetrated this horrible crime was also Lutheran, from another St. Paul's, but in Columbia, South Carolina. And so our denomination came out and said, we've got to acknowledge this. We've got to acknowledge the fact that, number one, we're too white. Number two, we love these folks that were killed. And how do we come together and say something about that? So in 2016, the denomination approved a commemoration celebration in June of the Emmanuel Nine, and it's an annual event on the calendar. And of course, when Jay came to town, we reached out to each other, as he said, right away, and we wanted to talk about how do we commemorate that, how do we remember it together. We were very fortunate in that the Bishop of the North Carolina Synod of the Lutheran Church in America came this past year and was one of the keynote speakers. But we also had some wonderful folk that were part of that event. And we've done now 2 or 3 events together in worship We worked on trying to get people out to vote during the national election the last time. And I sent a flyer, and I'll attach it in the chat in a little bit. Tomorrow night on Zoom, both of our congregations are sponsoring a conversation with the Durham County Director of Elections, Derek Bowens. And he is going to speak about the process of getting people out to vote and how to register, talking about early voting and the election day voting, and also what's coming up this year and those kinds of things, trying to encourage people to get out and participate in the community, in the government that we have. And it gladdens my heart to be able to do this together with St. Joseph. The connection we have now, I keep a picture of Mother Emanuel Church on my wall in my office as a reminder of the relationships that we have. And finally finished, Jay, your book that came out of your doctoral ministry program. And I'm just so grateful that this leader in the AME Church, who's now on their judiciary and just a fine leader, is willing to connect with us in that way. I'd also like to say, if Pastor Amanda Hyben, who's on this call with us, she's the campus pastor at Duke University for the Lutheran students, if she'd be willing to unmute and make a few comments about how that reconciliation worked with the students.
Thank you, Pastor Scott. Thank you, Pastor Jay. Let's see. So I think, want to emphasize and draw attention to the work of the students in this reconciliation ministry. They were engaged in this all of pretty much last academic year. The Duke Lutherans have a history of engaging in the work of peace and justice and reconciliation. But of course, the summer of 2020 and the murder of George Floyd brought new urgency to that. And as Donna said earlier, we can be educated to death about this, but the real work comes in relationship with one another. And that's what the students wanted to be about, was to engage in real conversation, face-to-face conversation, and learning and sharing of their life experiences, sharing questions with one another. And so we applied for a grant last year through our synod to fund this partnership, and we received it. And that enabled us to do several things, one of which was a book study. We studied a book called The Roadmap to Reconciliation 2.0 by Dr. Brenda Salter McNeil. There were 20 in our group, most of whom were students equally divided between the Duke Lutherans and students from St. Joseph, who are students at a variety of our local schools, but including NC Central and NC State. And so it was a very even balance of students, but we also had some members of some members from St. Joseph, some members from our two partner congregations for the Duke Lutheran, St. Paul's, and then Grace Lutheran, which is on East Campus, a Missouri Synod congregation. We had hoped, of course, to do it in person. That couldn't happen because of Zoom. And so we met every other week over Zoom to work through the chapters of this book. Most importantly, though, the conversation and the dialogue was led by the students. Part of the grant was scholarships. We had 4 students, 2 from St. Joseph, 2 from Duke Lutherans, receive scholarship to truly serve as leaders in this work. And so although the group as a whole met every other week, in the off weeks, the student leaders met to debrief together about the previous week's conversation, to focus in on particular issues that were local for us, such as issues around housing and the ways that racism manifests in all of the systems that we are a part of in Durham and throughout the country and the world. And so it was truly the students who showed up week in and week out and did this work. The grant also funded us together, we did the Racial Equity Institute's groundwater training, which was a half-day workshop for that. We did that together, and then also, as Pastor Jay and Pastor Scott mentioned, finally we're able to worship in person, which was a very joyous event at St. Joseph in commemoration of the martyrdom of the Emmanuel Nine. Katie Elkin is here. She's one of our students. Katie and then another student from St. Joseph, Janelle, they both spoke at that service and shared what it was like for them to participate in these relationships, that it was hard and challenging work. These students did not know one another before we met on Zoom, and we all know that Zoom does not lend itself to truly knowing one another, especially when it comes to difficult subjects that we don't always talk about or have the language to talk about. We acknowledge that Sunday morning is the most segregated time in America. The students talked about that. And so it was wonderful to hear the testimonies of Katie and Janelle at that service. And I want to commend them for their bravery, their vulnerability, their honesty. The students also recognized that their work together was far from done, that this is long work, this is ongoing work. And so we wanted to try again, apply for another grant through our Synod to take the next steps in racial reconciliation. And we were envisioning a post-COVID time when we could truly be together and share meals together and travel places together and maybe do service projects together. Of course, that's still a bit restricted. We still have to be cautious, although we have, thankfully, because of the vaccines, are able to do a bit more in person. And so, as was shared, we just received word that we've been approved for another grant. So that will consist of another book study together. We're not entirely sure of what that book will be. We have a few possibilities. And Pastor Jay has led us in recommendations for what that book might be. But that then also will be another round of scholarships for 4 students to serve as our student leaders for this collaboration. We will also be joining with Duke Chapel in the Durham Pilgrimage of Pain and Hope in November. And so the grant helps to cover the expenses for that. And so we're hopeful that our students will be able to participate. And then the Duke Lutherans had planned in the spring of 2019 to do an alternative spring break trip, a race and faith trip to Montgomery and Alabama to visit a lot of the vital places to the civil rights movement, historic places. And also to especially see the new memorial, the Peace and Justice and the Memorial Museum. Some people know it as the Lynching Museum. That is one place we plan to go. In any case, that was canceled because of Duke said no spring break trips in the spring of 2019. We'd hoped to do it last year. That didn't happen. It is our every intent and purpose to do it this spring, God willing, and the saints be praised. But we have also received funding through this grant for scholarship for students, our students, St. Joseph students, to do this trip together. So we are really looking forward to this travel and this service learning time together, and stay posted.
If I can follow very briefly, and thank you so much for that, Amanda. I think one of the things that is implied, and I want to just elevate or magnify and make it express, to dismantle racism, it takes relationships. and relationships are formed, notwithstanding the confines of Zoom, but relationships are formed when we are able to interact and dialogue with one another, and we eliminate xenophobia because we realize we have no reason to fear someone who's different from us. 2020, to Amanda's point, was a horrible year. It was absolutely horrible. I can preach the gospel and find a lot of hope and assure others of a better day. But 2020 in and of itself was a horrific year. And in addition to the pandemic, obviously, there was a pandemic of racism. And that pandemic was amplified because George Floyd woke everybody up. So I am, whenever there is tragedy, there's always opportunity. So again, I commend DCIA for taking the initiative to bring people together to say these are conversations that we need to have. Let me also say more to follow on this at a very subsequent point. I am so proud of my alma mater of Duke Divinity School because our Center for Reconciliation that I now am engaged with was very extraterritorial facing. We were very much engaged in reconciliation in other countries, but candidly, we're sort of silent on the domestic front. Again, George Floyd has caused an alarm for everyone. So I'm excited about the leadership of the Divinity School, of the dean who serves also as director of the Center for Reconciliation. I'm excited about the things I bring to the table there in a domestic capacity, and more to follow, particularly with this group, as we amplify the argument for reconciliation, why we can come together, notwithstanding the lack of conciliatory relationships in the past, but why we truly can come together with a biblical and social mandate, and why the church should lead in that effort. So I'm so excited about what the future holds.
I think I'm looking forward to, we've had, as a congregation, we've had a race and reconciliation task force now for 6 years. And continue to have dialogue together. We raise tough questions and look for common ground in ways that we can begin to understand. A lot of this started for us when Jay talks about relationships. One of our African-American members who I'm always amazed why he comes to the church in which I preach. And I'm always sort of look and say, what are you doing here? He came to me at the time of George Floyd's death, and he looked at me and he said, Pastor, I'm frightened. I'm frightened every day of the week. I'm frightened every moment of my life. I get up in the morning and I have my wife walk around my car with me to make sure the headlights work and the taillights work. And I honk the horn to make sure it works. And I want to make sure that I'm going to be safe going to work. And you know, as this old white guy, I'm sitting around going, wait a minute, you're the most put together man I know. And I'm always just amazed that you're here. And why? And he looked at me and he said, when I get in my car, I'm just a black man. And it hit me so hard that, and I not only did I want to weep, but I wanted to do something. And what do you do? Well, if we don't start having conversations together and learning to live together and be together, worship together, not be afraid to change our ways a little bit, we're never going to understand each other fully. I'm never going to understand the fear in the eyes of a member who I know should not have any fear. And then I know Jay's work continues to inspire me. I know he's working now on the reparations task force with the North Carolina Council of Churches, and in some wonderful dialogue about that. And that's a conversation that, quite frankly, scares the heck out of a lot of the people in my congregation. And it shouldn't. It should be an understanding of the need for economic restoration, for hope for the future. And how do we begin to tell people to quit being afraid of things when there are just ways for us to share the abundance that God has given us. And I'm looking forward to the kind of dialogues that we can continue to have around those sorts of issues together.
So to Scott's point about the perspectives, right, the varied perspectives, here is an African-American parishioner who is as right as rain in his feelings and his fears, because this is America, right? And Scott's perspective is very different. But to be able to come to a table and to dismantle racism, we've got to look at the country's history for what it is and be willing, those people who say, well, America does not have a history of racism. America has a history of a few racists. And for someone else to say, no, America has a history of systemic racism. There's no reason to be disagreeable just because you disagree. But if you can have a conversation, each side can learn from the other and recognize that your perspective is influenced by your subjective experiences. Again, this goes back to my comment about the natural relationship, the connection that Scott and I had in emanating from the top, if you will, from the two congregations, from the leadership being together and setting a tone where dialogue is open. There's no such thing as a quote unquote right answer. We're here to talk about feelings, and that's always very difficult. But we were able to facilitate a safe space. And I'm so thankful to Pastor Amanda in particular, the safe space that she facilitated week after week with the book discussions. Each chapter that delved into something different than the other, that invoked certain emotions and certain feelings. And based on your subjective experiences, how you looked at the subject matter of the respective chapters. I'm so thankful for the very safe space that she facilitated. To the congregations that will embark on this work, I will share with you very briefly, prior to coming to Durham full time, I did a reconciliation collaborative in New Orleans where I was pastoring. I was serving as the senior pastor at historic St. James AME Church, which was founded in 1844. It's the oldest predominantly Black church in the city of New Orleans and the first AME church founded in the Deep South, right? We did a collaborative with St. Paul's United Church of Christ, which was a very white United Church of Christ, but wonderful pastor. Again, there was a connection and a true friendship, and we still remain friends to this day. That culture is slightly different from Durham's culture. However, one commonality, people love food, right? I would highly recommend, if it is at all possible, we had gumbo, we had catfish, we were able to bring dishes, authentic dishes from our respective cultures, the Germanic folks, from respective cultures, literally international dish night in a space where we were able to share and just break barriers and be open and talk. People love food in Durham, North Carolina too. It may not be as good as the food in New Orleans. Did I say that? But anyway, people love food in Durham, North Carolina too. So given pandemic protocols, I respect them, of course. But if we are able to get in a comfortable space to deliberately break down barriers and just talk with one another, we can eliminate xenophobia, and the church has got to lead in that work. That's honestly how I feel. The church has got to lead in that work.
Yeah, I agree 100%. We're really looking forward to the day where we can invite our congregations together to come for that kind of an event. We've talked in the past about, could we do something outside? We're going to get there. We're going to get over this pandemic. It's not going to last forever. And when that breaks and when we're able to do some things, we're going to be able to bring our congregations together. Nothing gladdened my heart more than when Pastor Jay was able to open up his congregation and invite us to come in for the worship service. And our members were willing to go down to St. Joseph and be a part of that worship service. And they weren't big numbers, because there aren't big numbers in any of our congregations right now in person, but they'll get there. And the dialogue is what's really exciting, and the potential for the continued work together is really exciting to me. And I give thanks to God every day that the relationship happened in the way it did between Jay and I, and give thanks for the relationship that's developing within our congregations.
And I just want to lift up very briefly, Spencer, I'm going to defer to you because I know we're probably approaching the time where we want to open up for dialogue and questions, but to lift up what I consider to be the culminating event, which was the June 17th joint worship experience. I really a service of lament, but a prophetic witness service. I'm so grateful for Bishop Tim with the Lutheran Church physically being there with us, owning and calling on the carpet the history of racism in America, and recognizing the same demographics that Scott spoke to, the whiteness of his denomination, but his wantingness, if you will, to grow and to expand and to embrace diversity. and to embrace other perspectives. We're so appreciative of that. But that culminating event was so very special because of the preacher. The Reverend Dr. James A. Forbes is a preacher's preacher, let's be clear. He serves with distinction as the first African-American pastor at the Riverside Church in New York for about 18 years, if I'm not mistaken. And since his retirement has been back home in North Carolina. It is a blessing to call him a mentor. It's a blessing to be in conversation with him several times a week. He's a wonderful spirit, and he took the initiative in preparing to preach. He called me and said, I need to know, what were they studying that night? What was the text for the Bible study? I said, what? So he did the research and found out it was Mark's The Parable of the Sower, and preached that thing and put us in the movie, and we were watching the movie while we were in the movie. And I mean, I was like, my God, that was a blessing from heaven, right? But so that first joint event, again, it's something I hope we will do every year, and I hope other congregations will do it every year. I hope more people will do Bible studies to explore racism through that lens. But it's made possible because of relationships. So as long as we can come to the table and acknowledge our differences. Here is the great thing. I love food analogies too. Here's the great thing about gumbo, right? Gumbo is not the ingredients coming together and losing their identity. The shrimp is still the shrimp, the oysters are still the oysters, the crab still the crab. It all comes together, maintaining its identity, but together it makes for something that is rich and incredibly tasty. Am I preaching yet? I better stop. It's not even Sunday yet. The point I'm trying to make, though, is when people can come together, acknowledging who they are, not losing who they are, but respecting the diversity of them coming together, they really are much stronger. I think the old cliche is that the sum is much stronger than the parts. Having said that, I just want to say thank you. And Spencer, I will defer to you, and I'm certainly happy to be in conversation and communication with everybody.
Thank you. Appreciate your sharing, and in spite of your well, let's call it an underdeveloped regard for our Durham cuisine yet. It was good to hear that account of your experience in New Orleans, as well as what y'all have been doing together here in Durham. I do want to apprise everyone that I think Amanda alluded to it, but in fact, Jay, as one might say, has written the book on this subject, maybe not the book, but certainly a book that is due to be released, I believe, in March of next year, named Called to Reconciliation. Called to Reconciliation. So I would encourage everyone to contact the regulator or your favorite local bookseller about ordering a copy for you when it's published. I think that we'll when Jay's doing a reading of that next spring, God willing, it'll all be back in person again, and we'll be able to announce and publicize that reading for everyone to go attend and hear him present that publication. So
Spencer, thank you for opening that door. I just have to take the shameless plug. Thank you so much. February 8th, we actually moved it up. February 8th is the print date. Called to Reconciliation: How the Church Can Lead in Justice, Diversity, and Inclusion. And it is published by Baker Academic. Called to Reconciliation. If you look on Amazon and do a Google search for my name, Jonathan is my given name. That's what my mother used to call me, right? Praise the Lord. Jonathan, Jonathan C. Augustine. But if you Google the book, it'll come up. Barnes and Noble, all booksellers, and any place books are sold. But thank you so much for acknowledging that, though.
Sure thing. Yeah, we will. And I think we'll probably need to arrange a follow-up event gathering after that, just in case the regulator and the divinity school aren't doing enough locally to raise the profile of that event, of that date. But that's and I should also say DCIA is working and hoping to also be able to present Dr. Forbes to our membership and community at an upcoming near event as well that we hope to say some more about later on this fall. But that's you're right. He's been an important voice for justice and spirituality in our society for some decades now. I want to acknowledge that as we enter our time of conversation and questions, I do want to thank our district attorney, Satana DeBerry, for attending here with us, and City Council Member Deidreana Freeman. Council Member Freeman is also one of the leading leaders, organizers of our Episcopalians United Against Racism here in Durham. And we appreciate their presence here with us this afternoon. I have not seen any specific questions raised in the chat yet. So I'm going to start with a question, and if you want to raise a question, please enter it in the chat or raise your hand, and I will call on you soon. While we have Amanda on with us, I wanted to thank her for sharing what the students had worked at and experienced. And I wonder if, Amanda, you might be willing to say some more. I know that confidentiality and anonymity in conversations of deep sharing like this are often important, but if you would be able to say some more about if there were topics or items of particular difficulty in speaking about among the students that were having a conversation, the members of your group who were there, and if there were lessons learned in coming through some of those difficult conversations, sensitive matters that you learned from, or the group learned from by navigating those, that you would be willing to share. I think that's something that would be significant learning. If you can identify, one or two that you think would be appropriate to share about.
It's a really good question. What was so interesting was that, again, this group did not know one another before we started. I mean, the Duke Lutherans knew one another, St. Joseph students. And then we come into this kind of artificial, forced virtual space. What I think was a special strength and gift of this group was not only its racial diversity, but these students ranged in age from first year students from Seattle to graduate students who had lived their whole lives in Durham and are very familiar with Durham's painful and complicated history and had experienced it as in their own lives. And so I'm just remembering a few stories that were shared from our St. Joseph siblings in Christ of their own experiences of racism, similar to what Pastor Scott shared. Those were, of course, hard to hear. the other thing is that our students, in addition to the variety of ages and from all around the country, from a variety of academic disciplines. So it was very interesting to see the questions they brought given their areas of passion and study. But I think what was vital was that we also, in addition to the very hard conversation, I think we were mindful of laying some groundwork. We did silly things like we played 2 truths and a lie as an icebreaker, if you're familiar with that. We did a fair amount of just laughing together and seeing one another as friends and having fun together, which then I think that safe space that Pastor Jay talked about helped to create that so that the students could be more vulnerable, either sharing when they had experienced racism and been victims of it, or been complicit for our white students, and acknowledging their ongoing work of repentance and growing awareness and awakening. But more often than not, I just listened and deeply admired and was inspired by the risks they were willing to take with one another. And to share from their own personal experiences and the questions, what they were continuing to wrestle with. And there, I think truly by the end of it, there was a sense of shared mutuality and community. And what does it mean? What does it mean for them as full disciples in their own right of Jesus Christ to practice the ministry of reconciliation? And what does it mean for them to be siblings in Christ?
Thank you. And yeah, if you have some further thoughts on that during our time together, please jump in as well. I am with all of you hopeful that vaccinations and immunization is going to render in-person activities much more available and practical for planning some of the things that you had mentioned, hoping to be able to engage in, that there had been some discussion and preparation for around the meals together, service projects together, travel like to Montgomery, have also come up with in the experience of others working at this as formatively significant for building a relationship and more familiarity, intimacy in shared activities and experience together. I did want to thank one of you for mentioning the Pilgrimage of Pain and Hope for Durham, the Durham Pilgrimage of Pain and Hope that is organized by our sister organization, Durham Cares, and would recommend for other congregations that are exploring or developing plans for these kinds of relationships and dialogues to put that on your short list of prospective shared activities as a time for learning about Durham's history and its and the practice and experience of racism in our community over the decades, as a way to learn how others have experienced racism in Durham over time. There were, I saw that Joe had mentioned that your stories certainly highlight the importance of intentional personal relationships, as well as intentional planned activities together. I think I would also highlight the fact that y'all recognize the need for resources to fund and sustain this work as well. I know in a previous conversation, one of our forums, there was some discussion about the investment of time and attention and planning and organizing activities that would be meaningful and helpful for members from different communities to share together. Same goes for money, I think, as well. As I believe someone once said something about where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And if these, so that for conducting and sustaining this work of relational relationship building and study and conversation together, putting some of those things in the budget for congregations is important. And if there's real deliberation and intentionality to see these things grow legs and have endurance and to continue, not beyond just a moment, but to become part of the faith life of a congregation. I would also want to ask Amanda or J.R. Scott also if there were, Amanda, you alluded to some of the significant spiritual aspects of faith life that fed the conversation as well. I wonder if any of you would like to speak to, for instance, the ways that that prayer, scripture, other faith activities and spiritual practices played a part in these relationships and conversations.
I will share briefly from a scriptural perspective. Worship is obviously corporate worship, whether it be in a virtual space or a physical space. It's fundamental to who we all are. The text says what the text says, but there is a certain way, I think, of interpreting the text. I call it prophetic preaching, interpreting it through a prophetic lens, rather. So it is more inclusive rather than exclusive, and so it's more affirming and liberating rather than rejecting and confining. I think we all did a good job in coming together to make sure, or in making sure rather, that our textual interpretations in corporate worship and sharing were very inclusive and made everyone feel welcome, and we were able to draw closer together. The old saying goes, of course, that which unites us is far greater than anything that could divide us. And the body of Christ should really be a place of unity where we all have a seat at the proverbial table. Or if we get to some of that food, Spencer, at the real table, right? But no, I really think the textual interpretations in which we engaged during the course of the last year's dialogues, and obviously we're prospectively thinking about the next year too. I think the inclusive nature of that has been really heartwarming for me, at least.
Yeah, and we continue to lift up St. Joseph in our prayers. They're listed on our prayer list every week, and we are trying to make sure that we have that connection lifted up. And of course, spiritually uplifting. Anytime I can come over to St. Joseph AME and sit at the foot of the angels as they sing, I'm glad to come, and I have choir envy. So we're learning some of that from one another as well. But mostly I'm excited about, as Jay said, I think we're working very well together to try and understand the sensitivities of the congregations, but try and break down the barriers so there's less and less issues around sensitivities and more dialogue around unity and wholeness in the body of Christ that is the church.
Thank you. We are approaching our end time here, and I just want to give a last invitation for folks to raise their hand or put something in the chat during our last couple of minutes here. I appreciate Kathy and Adriana sharing their announcement that about URs, or Episcopalians United Against Racism, their roundtables on Wednesdays, which are available online. And we've been pleased to help publicize, promote a few of those. I think she put in some link information there, and encourage y'all to follow those. And they always have some stimulating presenters as a place to engage the work of these conversations around racism. I do want to also acknowledge the work that was alluded to that Jay's doing with the North Carolina Council of Churches on reparations. I know I think Mindy Douglas has been on with us, a former officer at the council as well. That's significant work that here in Durham at the In Poverty Durham table and the UR table, there's been ongoing conversations about reparations and ways to address those locally. And the Durham City Council has had conversations and initiated some plans on engaging with that work as well. So Jay, when the council has something to present on as events or reports back on steps for churches and faith communities to take on reparations, we'd be very interested in sharing that around. Make sure you get back to us on that, please.
Absolutely. Thank you for that acknowledgement. Absolutely.
That's lively. That's a lively topic here in Durham, both among our faith communities and beyond them as well. Though, as Scott mentioned, for a lot of our congregations, it's going to be it's a difficult, contentious topic for a number of our members as well. So, but we want to help equip our faith communities for standing in and engaging difficult topics well with in constructive and truthful ways. So thank you very much. You will have seen in our last news email, I see Deidreana, you have a question, comment, please unmute yourself.
My apologies. I was trying to swallow lunch over here while I was listening in, so I was trying to talk too much. But I did want to note that in light of that conversation around reparations, it's good to have it. And it's also good to start some of that work around transformational processes that could occur. And I really want to say that the Tenants' Bill of Rights is one of those processes. And so just noting, like, we may not be able to initiate everything at the municipal level, but the work to get our state on board and the federal government is what builds our community together, especially as faithful folks in many different faith communities. We know how we organize within our faith communities, and it's important that we have your support. So I would love to be able to come back and share that on the city council side, not the EUAR side, but the city council side. I would love to come back and share some of that information with you all if I could have a chance.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And yes, I've been having some conversation the last couple of weeks with an organizer with the Durham Tenants Union about that campaign and the work being started with City Council to address and implement some of these. And you'll be seeing some more about this in our Durham News email coming up, as well as I anticipate in some upcoming online forums as well. Thanks for mentioning that, Councilmember Freeman. That's great. We will be our next. I appreciate Michael Binger from Society of St. Andrew mentioning the gleaning work coming up this weekend that they are still taking volunteers for. There's a notice about that in our last DCIA news email, and encourage you to help out this Society of St. Andrew, one of our crop walk partners, this weekend if you have the opportunity. Next month on October 19th, World Food Day, as it happens, we will be having another Zoom forum here at DCIA on Afghan refugee resettlement. Our two local refugee resettlement partners in Durham, Church World Service and World Relief Durham, will have representatives to share what they're doing, how local congregations and individuals and employers can get involved and have been getting involved with hospitality and welcome for Afghan refugees coming to this community. We will be seeing hundreds and hundreds of Afghan refugees in the coming weeks and months resettling here in the Triangle area. And a number of our faith communities have been already asking how they can get involved and support the resettlement of these global neighbors into lives of security and new homes here among us. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you especially to Amanda and Dr. Augustine and Reverend Anderson and Reverend Hyben. I really appreciate you joining us from Duke Campus today on this as well. Blessings on your continued work, and keep us updated. And we will look forward to seeing you again, inshallah, in person. So have a blessed day, everyone. Thanks again for joining us.